Oh, just wanted to check in. We got a quick video today along with a worksheet. So, what you'll want to do is find your notebook, write Total War. You don't have to write the rest, but the things we're going to talk about are the role of women, the role of production, and the role of bombing in World War II, around that concept of World War II being a total war. By a total war, we mean that all parts of society are involved. Everybody is going to take a part in the war. It's not just going to be the soldiers fighting off in the battles, it's also going to be the people at home who are doing all of the work necessary to make the war happen. All right, first thing I want you to do is to pause this video after I'm done here in a second. I'll tell you when, and go off and do that worksheet. It has two charts that you're going to answer some questions about. It should be relatively simple, but make sure you take your time and get the right answers because it's going to be graded, first of all. And second of all, I'm going to take a look and see how you guys are grabbing this concept because it's going to be important and we'll build on it. All right, so pause this for a second and go take a look at that. All right, and we're back. All right, so I'm not going to go through all the answers because I want you guys to do that on your own, but I wanted to look at this chart. I think this chart really shows you what the war is. So this is the industrial production of the Allies and the Axis during the war, with the very main ones. And you can see that the reason the Allies won is because they built more of basically everything. They built more machine guns, more artillery, way more tanks. I mean, three or four times the tanks. They built, eight times the carriers. They built way more landing craft, which shows they're on the offensive. They built huge ships. They built small ships. They built everything. And if you look, even breaking it down further, you can see that most of the production came from the United States. The United States was pretty much untouched by the war, and they also had huge industrial production. So they're producing over half of the planes that the Allies make. They produce more planes than the Axis does, by itself. The U.S. does more than the Axis. They're having way more machine guns than the Axis all by itself. The United States really wins this war with production. The American soldier fought well, but also was better armed than anybody else it ran into, and always had a steady supply. If you destroyed an American tank, there were five more coming. They got to the point where they were rolling a plane off the production line every hour, which is just impressive and shows the whole country coming together. All right, so part of that production aspect was women getting involved in the war. That men went away to fight, so women stepped in. You can see this ad, which is maybe a little patronizing, says, good work, sister. We never figured you could do a man-sized job." So they're saying that American women have stepped up, and this V in the background is for victory. Was a common thing. You see this woman is dressed kind of in a work outfit, and she has done her job. You can also see that this wasn't something that was true before the war. Before the war, women worked, but they mainly worked when they were unmarried. You might be able to work as a teacher, as like a governess or a servant. There were very few opportunities for women to work. By 1945, when the war is over, there's over 200,000 female workers just in airplane factories. So that's just one industry among dozens of industries where women were working. That's 19 million women were working in the U.S., and that's just the U.S., but this is going to be true around the world, as we'll talk about. They were over a third of the laborer. Other men who would be working there would be older men who couldn't fight, or if someone had a disability, they were colorblind, they had asthma, often they were held out. And now it wasn't just single women. 1 out of 10 married women was working in a factory. These women were taking home wages, they were making their family more wealthy, they were buying more things. This was really something that transformed lives. They did surveys towards the end of the war, and somewhere from 2/3 to 85% of women wanted to keep their jobs after the war. Most of them would not, but that kind of sets the stage for women to work. When we get up to today, many women work. One of the things I thought was interesting is that there were jobs that women were better at. Oftentimes, climbing into the small areas in planes or in tanks, women were better than males. They were smaller. Their hands were better at repetitive work, at precision tasks. So in a lot of ways, it went better with having women take over many of these jobs because they were actually just better at the job. This is true also in Britain, as you can see from this. Britain had 7 million women working full time in industry. They also had millions more who were serving in the military. Women, this is something we don't talk about a lot. They also did often join basically women's army things. They didn't tend to do a lot of frontline work. What they did mostly was work as nurses at far away hospitals, so not the hospital up by the front lines, but further back. They drove trucks. They moved around supplies. They worked on boats. They handled telephones as various different units talked to each other. They really worked everywhere that they could. They often were recruited. Sometimes they had shortages. So this one kind of makes women feel like you'll be on the front lines, helping out the British, help out Russia. We've got, people from London coming, but really they're just working in factories. But this might make you feel that you were a part of the war effort, like your brother or husband or son. One difference of this happened in Germany and everywhere else. Russia was really one of the only countries that really encouraged women to actually actively fight in the war. They often fought as snipers. Women were very, very proficient. They had many of them who were the top snipers in Russia were women who fought in battle with men, died in battle with men, became officers. This is kind of part of that concept of socialism. Socialism at the time was a little more interested in women and men being equal in women's rights. It's just kind of one of the inherent things of socialism, although there still was discrimination and still were women not working in the same roles as men. But in Russia, you could join the military, fight in the front lines, fight as guerrilla warriors. You could do all of that. Children got involved as well. You're seeing here images of what children were doing. Some of them were working in factories. They often could fit into small places, so you would work there. You can see this happens all over the place. They're using pneumatic big drills, which you can imagine would be kind of fun if you were 10 years old at first. Other children were involved in other smaller efforts. Rubber drives were a big deal, where they would go and try to dig through dumps and stuff to find rubber, so you could melt it down and make new rubber. Scrap metal drives. Shows true of the Axis too. This is in Japan. These are children who are working in, I believe, a clothing factory making uniforms for their soldiers. You can see someone's playing a piano to kind of keep them entertained. But they are hard at work for the war effort. So women and children also involved, kind of that concept of total war. The final thing I want to talk about is bombing. So, with the fact that women and children were so big and industry was such a big part, both sides realized this and wanted to attack that. Now, you can't get to factories unless you invade them by land, but you can get to them by airplane. And in the 20 years between the two wars, World War I and World War II, a lot of things changed. So, this is a World War I bomber. You can see it's very small. They were usually hand dropping bombs. Some of the more advanced ones later in the war, which they never built enough of to really do much, were uh, were capable of dropping more bombs. But the vast majority were mainly used for kind of reconnaissance, which means kind of looking out and seeing where troops are. But World War II, that changes. This is a B-17, which the United States made hundreds of thousands of. This was kind of one of the main uh, planes that they used in bombing raids. So this held, 6, 7 guys. They had machine guns to protect it. It held thousands of tons of bombs that it could then drop. This first one had a range of, only a couple hundred miles. By World War II, they could go up to 2,000 miles carrying all of those bombs. So they really could fly all the way to Germany from Britain and back relatively easily. It went both ways, of course. During the Battle of Britain, this is a map of all the places in England that were hit. The purple dots are the places that were hit even harder. So most of London was being hit by bombs. I'm going to show you a few videos that kind of show this. This one we're just going to get a little bit of. Nice tight formation. So these are British war propaganda films. They filmed these bombing raids. So you see they kind of fly in formation, trying to protect one another because fighters are faster than them. And then when they get over the target, they get ready to drop. You've got guys with machine guns trying to protect them. Oftentimes they had fighters helping, and then they're dropping a big stick of bombs. They were not particularly accurate. Mostly they're just trying to bomb the area, which we will talk about. But you can see here, while they're missing a lot, they're kind of coming all over the place, and they would come back 4 or 5 days in a row and try to blow up an area. This might have had a factory, this might have had something else. Obviously, there are a lot of civilian homes as well. All right, moving on. This is another video. This is going to show you all the places where the Allies bombed during World War II in Europe. So we're going to start in 1939, and there's not a ton of bombs going on, you can see. This is, the war has just started, nothing's really happening yet, and then the war begins. There starts to be some small bombing of Germany. You can also see some bombing of German forces in France. These big raids would sometimes have 1,000 bombers coming to attack one city as they tried to knock it out. They often tried to target specific industries. So if you can knock out all of the oil, it doesn't matter if you get the tank factories, the tanks need oil to go. Another common one was the ball bearing, which is a small piece that is used in basically every single gun, every single tank or anything. So if they can knock out the ball bearing factories, they do well. So now you see the fact these bombings are getting bigger in Germany. They're getting massive. And then you'll see as we hit 1944, it starts moving over to France. That's because the United States is about to invade France, so they're trying to knock out all of that. So they're bombing all over northern France, trying to knock out railroads and all of that. And then as they invade, it starts to move back towards Germany. So we can see we're hitting, 3.6 million tons of bombs. So 3.6 trillion pounds of bombs are being dropped. All right, I thought that was cool. So oftentimes when a city came through, you can see this is what it might look like. It destroys entire huge cities, knocks down massive buildings. People are digging through the rubble afterwards, trying to find their possessions, trying to find food, trying to find what they will need to survive. It didn't always work very well to knock out factories. The Allies really thought they would win the war just by bombing the Germans to heck, but the Germans often moved production down low. So this is a subway tunnel in Berlin where they moved down and started building planes along flat cars. They would just kind of move them down the line and build planes. Down in here is another munitions factory that's underground in a mine. So really, they just forced the Germans to move their factories, which of course is a disruption, but they're still getting goods. Here's another one of Japan. I'm not going to skip a little bit of the first part because it's a little bit big, but here you can see the island hopping as they kind of start to attack islands. You'll see it start to move up as they move from island to island. So now they're over here, and they're moving in this way, and they're moving towards the Philippines, which is right here. As they capture island after island. You'll see some bombs behind right now. Those are places that they skipped. They would often bomb them to make sure that the defenders didn't try to get fancy and sail and attack another island. And now you see what they're really doing is up in Japan bombing like crazy. Let's go back a little bit at that. You can see massive bombing raids in Japan, including the atomic bombs, which we will talk about next week. All right. So Japan is interesting because much of their housing was built out of wood, much more common in Japan. So when they would drop bombs and fires would start, it would burn whole cities. So this is Tokyo, and just about the entire place has burned down. So this would be massively destructive. The bombing in Europe was never quite as crazy as in Japan. All right, last thing I want you to do, and then you'll be done. I want you to write a 5 to 7 sentence paragraph. I want you to have a topic sentence. I want you to have a concluding sentence. I will be grading this about what we mean when we say total war during World War II. What does that mean? What are some of the activities that show World War II was total war? How did this war encompass all of society? After that, you are done and can enjoy your long weekend.